This is Robert Murdlacci of the Mindshare Learning Report, Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine, and welcome to this special edition of This Week in Canadian EdTech. I'm honored to have join me from the Coquitlam SD43 School Division, Patricia Gartland, the Superintendent and CEO, and Stephen Whiffin, the Director of Instruction and CIO. Thank you for joining me in these challenging times.
Thank you, Robert, and it is a very challenging time indeed.
How is everyone doing? Hopefully you're all healthy, your families?
We are all safe and healthy, and I'm working from home.
Well, it seems to me that, in the conversations I've been having nationally, this just seems to be a hard reset button that we've hit, and redefining priorities personally and professionally. And from a learning perspective in the K-12, we just heard the announcement from the province of Ontario and how they're going to roll out. BC, as always, seems to be at the forefront of innovation and got at it a little earlier than others. And perhaps you can share, Patricia, about the vision for the province of British Columbia that's been articulated.
Well, I think we've been receiving very great direction and support from our Ministry of Education, and they have prepared an integrated planning framework for school districts in support of the K-12 education response to COVID-19 in BC, and that really provides very comprehensive guidelines for school districts in terms of addressing this pandemic and keeping all of our students, families, and staff safe during this time. And this framework also allows school districts a lot of freedom in how they implement continuity of learning and other strategies in this context.
Fantastic. And when is this all kicking off for you in BC? Is it next week?
Well, our spring break just ended. We had a 2-week spring break. So yesterday was the first day of school, technically, and we had principals, vice principals, clerical staff, and custodians in buildings. Teachers and support staff will begin coming in on Wednesday of this week, and that's really to start getting ready for the continuity of learning and the distance learning that we're going to be providing.
So let's talk about equity for a moment around the distance piece. So teachers are actually physically coming to the building?
Yes, but they have to come in a staggered schedule. We're really trying to, we've closed our schools to the public, but they're not closed to staff and students in some cases. For example, daycare for essential services workers. But we have to make sure that there's physical distancing, and we have to ensure the safety. We're doing very more rigorous cleaning techniques, and we have to have a routine around cleaning and around the amount of people that are in a building at any one time.
How are you dealing with the equity piece? There's been a lot of discussion nationally around the concerns about kids at home not having access to the internet or devices for that matter. How are you addressing that?
So Stephen Whiffin, our CIO, will address that in more detail, but we're very concerned about students who require face-to-face interaction in order to be successful are vulnerable students. And we're really concerned about how to provide learning assistance, emotional assistance, assistance for people with socioeconomic barriers, and personalized learning for those students. But in terms of access to laptops and so on, Stephen has a great strategy for that.
Oh, okay, great. Over to you, Stephen.
Okay, well, obviously there's a large number of issues that need to be dealt with as part of this experience. And one of which is ensuring that all students have equal and fair access to the experiences that we're creating. So there's a couple of layers involved in that. And it really is an element of looking at each of our school levels as a particular user group, because the context is substantially different, kind of starting in grade 6 for us. 6 to 12 is a different problem than kindergarten to grade 5.
Absolutely.
So if you look at our 6 to 12 environment, we are actually a bring your own device district to begin with. And that really changes the dynamic for us in terms of feeling confident that our families have technology available.
So you were already aware of the penetration of
Correct.
technology
We have
and
a lot of
addressed that.
knowledge of the status of
Right.
technology in our communities in those age groups. And the vast majority of our students already bring their own devices to school as part of those
Right.
experiences. And the schools, in turn, already supplement those families with technology,
Right.
where they choose not to bring their own for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So those are structures that we already had in place. We have a handful of schools that aren't fully bring your own device at this point. And so our current approach has been to identify those sites that have gaps, and then redeploy student technology that we have in a lab environment or CART in order to fill those gaps at those schools. So we're really confident in our ability to meet the technology needs from grade 6 to 12. The challenge is a little bit different at kindergarten to grade 5.
No
And
doubt.
so at this stage, we've engaged in a process of surveying families to understand exactly what they have, because we don't have as much intrinsic knowledge of that context at that age level. And we know we're learning very quickly the tools they have are different. So for example, where at 6 to 12, overwhelmingly our students have laptops, that may not be the case in younger age groups, but they happen to have an iPad in the building or in the home or something like that. And so we're able to play off of that in some different ways.
Or mobile devices as well, you know, the mobile phones that could be borrowed.
A phone is not necessarily a preferred way for a child to have to learn, but we know that can facilitate communication. And communication itself is a huge part of the experience in this situation.
That's a really good point, because one of the misconceptions, I would say, from the conversations that have happened nationally in some provinces, were talking from a branding perspective, the online learning piece. But truly, it's not all about online learning. That's to your point, that's a communication piece, but you might receive resources and work independently with the resource and not be online. So it's not about being online the whole time. And I think that's part of the challenge that some of the provinces misguided parents and teachers.
Yeah,
we've really seen technology as a way to enhance instruction and enhance opportunities for teachers and students and their families. So we've really, what Stephen and I have done over the last 5 years is implement a system-wide approach to what the district will implement and what the district will support, because we have limited capacity in terms of supporting every kind of technology and every app and every program. But we do have priorities as a district, and that's really allowed us to focus our resources in a meaningful way in having a district-wide standard and having a real equity. When you talk about equity, our goal was to have that equity of access and to really target the late adapters of technology to enhance teaching and learning. And as you know, that was part of our Directions 2020 strategic plan for the last 5 years. And then in terms of now, it's even more important. And Stephen, we have a daily Teams call with all of our school district leadership, including all principals and vice principals. And Stephen was emphasizing that we can't support everything everyone wants to do at home, not as a district. We applaud what they're doing, but we can't support it. So we have team leads and buddy systems and daily webinars that Stephen's implementing really to support people at a district level regarding mainly our Office 365 suite and other items that Stephen might want to elaborate on.
Well, kudos to you for having that vision. And it didn't happen overnight. This has been a journey you've been on, and this is just a transition that you were able to pivot quite smoothly, it sounds like. Over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, well, we are as Patricia has mentioned, we are quite fortunate in that we've invested in this capacity building really over the last 5 years. And as a result, our teachers have a lot of ability. And that ability is in sets of tools that we have chosen to prioritize and support as a district. I always say one of the challenges you have in any school system is if you believe you can support everything, it pretty much dictates you're not doing any of it well. Right? And
Right.
we've never been focused on doing things in a superficial way. We've always wanted to do them in a deep, rich, meaningful way. And that has dictated we've had to prioritize the tools that we're going to work on, because we always expect our tools to be well supported and always reliably work for teachers, work consistently regardless of the situation, and then be supported with the Pro-D and support needs, people support needs that are required to actually execute it well. And we've really done that systematically over the last 4 or 5 years.
Well,
That's really paying off right now, because now we're able to say, we are asking you to go to a core, to teachers, we're asking you to go to a core set of tools here in order to distribute resources, engage kids in instructional processes that are technology facilitated, and then create these learning experiences off of that that are as like the in-class experience as they could possibly be given the circumstance. And because the tools they're using are the same tools they actually use to enrich their learning experiences in the classroom, and they actually already accommodate all of those needs for working remotely, making that transition is probably a lot more seamless for us than we might be seeing in some other jurisdictions.
absolutely. Now, is this, and kudos to you for that again, are you seeing that same sort of trend happening across the province as well? I mean, BC tends to be ahead of other provinces from a, innovation standpoint around curriculum and technology and online learning.
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, like, we are sharing as directors of instruction and things, the challenges that we're all experiencing right now. And I agree, overall, there's a fair bit of capacity in British Columbia, but there's still a lot of diversity in the capacity from district to district. And that shows
Absolutely.
up at a time like this, where you may have, some smaller rural districts, for example, that are a lot more challenged because the experience there, because schools are physically isolated from each other more than they are in the city, like we have, the tendency of the experiences to be more school focused instead of district focused is a reality for them.
And I think if anything good can come of this, it's really that it's creating an opportunity for everyone to build their capacity in using technology for meetings, for teaching and instruction, for communication of all kinds. We're going to have a district parent advisory meeting tomorrow night using Zoom. And we have board meetings now that are using, our public meeting will be Zoom, our internal in-camera meetings are using Microsoft Teams. So everyone's increasing their ability to use technology to do their work. And that's one good opportunity that has arisen from this pandemic.
Necessity's the mother of invention, they say, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And we are forming a Canadian online consortium of resource partners and providers that want to help, that are providing the resource at no cost. And how are you managing that piece of the equation? Because I'm sure you've been inundated, Stephen, with incredible offers of generosity.
Inundated is the correct term to use. Hundreds of them, hundreds of offers for us to use products. So,
what advice do you have? What advice do you have? And we're trying to provide a coordinated effort. So what advice do you have on that note?
Well, hopefully most system leaders have already been a bit in tune with the products that are out there. There's a very few products that have sent information to me over the last week or two, which are products that I wasn't already familiar with in some way.
Right.
So one of the jobs we have as educational system leaders is to have knowledge of what's out there. And if we don't have knowledge of what's out there, then we actually aren't capable of making good decisions to support our systems. But within the context of effective strategic planning and setting of priorities, we also don't want to put ourselves in a position where we act too quickly to jump into something new because we feel a little bit of pressure around an emerging situation that's unfolding. I always take pride in the fact that we built good structures fundamentally, and we have good resources to draw on fundamentally, so that regardless of whatever situation unfolds, we already have some go-to pieces in place. And I think largely that's the case for us. But I also think everybody's in a situation right now where you're willing to say, hey, there might be some other pieces that could help us right now. And that does dictate that we have some awareness of what people are offering that maybe wasn't there yesterday, whether that's because they're offering something for free or they've made an adjustment to their product. There's been situations of that as well, in order to meet our needs better. And we need to have some time to cut through that and make sense of that. And that's where a consortium like you're talking about could be helpful, because it's very difficult for us to take time away from the immediate priority that's in front of us, which is to get teachers and kids working again, and go and spend our time looking at some of those other pieces. You know, that normally happens at the big events like ISTE, or the places where we get together 3 or 4 times a year. You can't normally do it when you're in the middle of your crunch time. And we are in an extended crunch time right now. So it's a challenge for us to go out and sort through that. Anything that could be done to help us make sense of that would be welcome.
Yeah, and good advice. Now, there's been a lot of talk around these different apps that are being offered at no cost, and then the concern around student privacy and data privacy. Perhaps you can shed some light on your perspective on that. I will be interviewing the CEO of CyberNB later this week on that very topic.
Well, so Stephen's an expert on privacy, and he's our CIO, our Chief Information Officer. But I just want to mention that the ministry document really emphasizes the importance of this cybersecurity and cybersecurity for our whole system, given some people will have remote access. And then privacy is very well emphasized in the document I mentioned, and also in the province of BC. And Stephen can elaborate on that.
Thank you.
Both of those elements, privacy and cybersecurity, are really important points right now. Now, I think a lot of people across Canada are familiar with the fact that the privacy rules in BC are already a little more strict than in many other jurisdictions. So we have a certain privacy awareness that maybe is a little beyond some other areas to begin with. I actually thought there might be a chance that we may be granted a bit of pass on some of those privacy issues in this time of crisis. But as Patricia has mentioned, when the framework document for districts was released late last week that guides our practice going forward around this, there was actually sections put in place around that, specifically identifying the importance of us keeping privacy as a focus. And the rationale for that was that as we're pulling students and parents into some ways of doing learning that they may be not that familiar with, it is going to raise questions for them around privacy. So for example, there's been some teachers in the province who have started to engage kids in Facebook early as a way of getting their classes started. But that creates some alarm amongst certain families around, well, we've heard all these negative things about Facebook. Is that the right thing to do? And so we don't want teachers just jumping into tools like that because they're anxious to get started. We want to make sure we're pulling them into tools that not only we support, but we are able to defend with our families and say, we know we can protect your privacy. We know what the boundaries are here. We know the steps we have to take to keep your children safe. Same goes for cybersecurity. I worry that many organizations worldwide, not just in education right now, are in such a rush to get their staff remote access to their environments that they're actually creating security holes in their system that could make them very, very vulnerable. We've refused to do that. We've slowed down our remote access approach. We've been very deliberate and methodical about how we do it, because we don't want to be the ones in that situation where all of a sudden our network is being held ransom by a ransomware attack. And in the middle of all of this we're dealing with, we actually can't work because we've exposed ourselves to cybersecurity issues.
Well, with that, I thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and at a very critical juncture in your relaunch of everyday learning. Congratulations for such a great vision that you carry, and the kids are in SD43 are lucky to have your leadership and passion for making an impact.
Keep safe, everybody. Thank you, Robert.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for your time again. That was Patricia Gartland, the Superintendent CEO of SD 43 Coquitlam, and Stephen Whiffin, the Director of Instruction and CIO. And be sure to check out www.Mindshare Learning to get your latest issue of the Mindshare Learning Report. And until next time, keep the learning curve steep and stay safe. That is a wrap.